Hey everybody, it's Mike from the Kick Sugar Summit. Welcome, welcome. We're partnered this year with the Low Carb USA guys, and they brought us incredible speakers. Today we've got Dr. Robert Lustig, someone I've been wanting to talk to for a long time. He's a professor emeritus of pediatrics at the Division of Endocrinology at the University of California, San Francisco. And he specializes in neuroendocrinology, which I believe is the brain. You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong. And energy regulations and balance in the central nervous system. He focuses mostly on child obesity and diabetes, which metabolic syndrome falls in, or it is part of metabolic syndrome. And it's just he's got two books out there, Hacking the American Mind, which is his newest one, and Fat Chance, which is all about this sugar stuff and this epidemic. So, Dr. Lustig, welcome, welcome, welcome. I mean, you're such a good speaker. I can probably just turn you on. You'll be, your information is so in depth. One thing I have to warn you is that most of our folks are not real sciencey, I don't think. I mean, you can go there a little bit, but we got to keep it a little, how should we say, for the average folk, the person who's new. But tell us how you got into all this.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you, and I'll try to keep the science to a minimum. But the most important thing for your audience to understand is that there is science. So knowing that makes a big difference. I'm not just talking out of my where. that there's actually a reason for it, and I didn't come to this nutrition food fight with an agenda. I was 30 years into my career, before I really, sort of reared my ugly head in terms of advocacy. I was purely a researcher. I was not interested in doing anything other than publishing papers and getting grants. But this problem became so severe. As a clinician, I was taking care of, patients. They were coming to my office, and every one that I helped, 10 more showed up at my door, and I realized, I could not keep up, and in good conscience, I could not withhold this information from the general public. So, here I am.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you talk about obese children and alcohol of the child being the sugar with fatty liver. Tell us what you saw in those early days.
Well, the very first patient that I ever saw with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease was 1996. And it was a 13-year-old in Memphis, Tennessee. And he was massively obese at about 330 pounds, 13-year-old. And he had liver enzymes that were just through the roof. And he had a liver biopsy, and it showed, the beginnings of cirrhosis. And I'm wondering, he didn't have hepatitis, and he wasn't an alcohol drinker. And, what is this? And that was back in 1996. Now, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease was first introduced to the general public as an entity in 1980. Before 1980, if you had fatty liver disease, you were an alcoholic. But now, all of a sudden, we started seeing this in children. And since that 1996 case, which was now 23 years ago, it has only just skyrocketed. And in fact, now we know that 15% of autopsy specimens in children show fatty infiltration of the liver, and 40% in obese children. And we've already done 2 liver transplants on 400-pound 15-year-old soda drinkers at UCSF. So this problem is becoming enormous. And the question is, what caused it? Well, people say, how'd you figure out how this disease, came to be? In 2006, I was asked by the NIH to come to a celebratory conference on the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, which is at Research Triangle Park. And they were celebrating 100 years of public health. And so they wanted to start with the, 2 diseases that they had, clearly made inroads in because of public health. And so those were lead poisoning and pollution and asthma. And then the next day they wanted to talk about, the sort of the two next big things in public health. And one, of course, was obesity and metabolic syndrome. The other one was going to be ADD and autism. So they asked me, what do you think is the big cause of obesity and metabolic syndrome, especially in children? And I sat down and I started looking at, what was going on. I said, well, what diseases do children now get? And of course, it was type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease. I said, all right, well, where did you see those diseases before? And I was, old enough to remember life before 1980. And I said, those were the diseases of alcohol. I said, yeah, but kids don't drink alcohol. So I picked up my biochemistry textbook and said, okay, are kids exposed to anything like alcohol? And sure enough, when I looked at the pathways for sugar metabolism, for fructose, the sweet molecule in sugar specifically, it was like a dead ringer for alcohol. I mean, and in fact, it makes sense that would be the case because after all, where do you get alcohol from? Fermentation of sugar. It's called wine. The big difference between sugar and alcohol is that for alcohol, the yeast does the first step of metabolism, which we call glycolysis. For fructose, for the sweet molecule in sugar, we do our own first step. But after that, when the metabolites go to the mitochondria, the energy burning factories inside the cells, liver doesn't care where it came from. They were the same. From that point on, they were all the same. And I said, maybe this is what's going on. So I gave this talk at this, and my talk was just before the bathroom break. And nobody came back into the room. And I said, that's weird. So, I went to the bathroom and they're all milling around in the bathroom going, oh my God, he's right. This makes sense. This makes total sense. And I said I was going next to give a talk in Los Angeles to a bunch of dietitians. You've got to talk about this. And I went, oh my God. And anyway, I've been talking about it ever since. And of course, I've done a whole bunch of research studies now to basically nail this. And we're very excited because just 2 weeks ago, we published a paper in a very important journal, the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, that shows exactly how fructose, this sweet molecule sugar, does the damage. We have the toxic metabolite. Wow. It is called methylglyoxal, and we now understand exactly what it's doing and why it's doing it and how to get rid of it. The answer is stop the sugar. And then everything gets better, including getting rid of this bad metabolite. So I am very comfortable in what sugar does, how sugar does it, what diseases it causes, and how to turn this around. And, I think people want to hear this. That's why we're talking.
I love it. We're going to give you a platform, hundreds of thousands. Hey, I'm trying to suss out some quotes of yours. And once you said, I can't find it. I wish I could. You said that you think children should be 18 with ID to buy sugar. Does that still stand?
Coke. We don't card kids for Coke. We do card them for alcohol, for beer. Right. And to be honest with you, if you look at the metabolic damage between Coke and beer, they're the same. They cause the same problems. And, the question is that okay? Right now, society says it's okay. Right. I'm thinking it's not. Yeah. So, this is a conversation that has to be had. Now, right now, the public is not there, because they don't understand it. But that's my job, is to explain it to the public so that we can get there. Look, in the past 30 years, there have been four separate cultural tectonic shifts in public health. 4. Here they are. Number 1, bicycle helmets and seatbelts. 2, smoking in public places. 3, drunk driving. 4, condoms in bathrooms. Now, 30 years ago, if a legislator stood up in a state house or Congress or anywhere for that matter and proposed legislation for any one of those four, be laughed right out of town.
Right.
Nanny state, don't tell me what to do. Get out of my kitchen, get out of my bathroom, et cetera, et cetera. Get out of my bedroom,
right.
Blah, blah, blah. Okay, today, every one of those, facts of life.
Mm.
You don't hear nanny state for any of those things. And if you try to pull out of your garage without having buckled up, your kid will yell at you and the cop will give you a ticket.
Right.
So what happened in 30 years?
Right.
Okay. So these cultural tectonic shifts can happen, but they take a while because it's an intergenerational change. And we're just at the beginning of this one.
Right. Excuse you. I want to get more into the philosophy and what's going to happen later, but you mentioned the fructose. You talk a lot about fruit juice. Well, what about the fruit itself? And you said the body doesn't know the difference between fructose from table sugar and fructose from fruit, except it has the fiber. Can you explain that to folks so they kind of get that a little bit?
Sure. So, the short is fruit is good, fruit juice is bad. Mm-hmm. Now, most people say, well, what's the difference? So it's the stuff you throw in the garbage, the fiber. Mm-hmm. So it turns out the fiber and fruit is healthy, and I'm not suggesting fruit's healthy. Yet, fruit has this toxic compound called fructose. And fruit juice has it, yet fruit is okay. And the reason is because, and what I like to say is, when God manufactured the poison, he packaged it with the antidote. The fiber makes the sugar not a problem. And the reason is because the fiber makes the sugar not for you. It makes it for your bacteria in your intestine. Ah. So when you consume something, you're not feeding one person, you're feeding one person plus 100 trillion bacteria. Now, you have 100 trillion bacteria in your intestine. You only have 10 trillion cells in your body. Okay? They outnumber you 10 to 1. Each of us is really just a big bag of bacteria with legs. Now, they got to eat something to survive. The question is, what do they eat? Well, they eat what you eat. The question is, how much did you get versus how much did they get? Now, the sugar in fruit juice is the same sugar as in a Coke, which is the same sugar as in breakfast cereal, which is the same sugar as in cookies, candy, ice cream, salad dressing, barbecue sauce, yogurt, etc. Okay, the molecule is the same. There's no difference. Okay. Where the vehicle is not important; it's the payload that matters. Okay, they're all the same. The question is, who was that molecule for? Was it for you, or was it for your 100 trillion bacteria? And the thing that determines that is the fiber content of the food you're consuming. So when you consume whole fruit, you're consuming the sugar, which is not good, but you're consuming it with the soluble and insoluble fiber. Two different kinds of fiber. Soluble, like pectins, like what holds jelly together, and insoluble fiber, like cellulose, like the stringy stuff in celery. Now, they're both fiber. They're not the same. Okay. We don't chew up either of them, but the bacteria do. So when you consume fiber, you are feeding your bacteria. Now, when you consume fruit in its whole form, the fiber, the soluble and insoluble, work together to set up a gel on the inside of your intestine. Okay, so you need both. You need both the soluble and the insoluble, and you also need the geometry. So imagine, as a metaphor, you have a spaghetti colander, right? Mm-hmm. Metal lattice work with holes in it, right? You run water through it. Water goes right through. Now, throw a glob of petroleum jelly into the center of the colander. Run the water. Still going to run through, right?
Yeah.
I mean, some of the water might bounce off the petroleum jelly, but it's all going to end up in the sink anyway. Now take your finger and smear the petroleum jelly throughout the inside of that colander. Now run the water. Now the water stays in. You have created a barrier, an impenetrable barrier. And you needed the colander, which is the same as the insoluble fiber, a lattice work that sets up on the inside of your intestine. You need the petroleum jelly, which is like the soluble fiber, which are like plug the holes in that lattice work. And finally, you need the geometry of the two together to be able to form that barrier. When you consume whole food, including fruit, you're getting the soluble fiber, the insoluble fiber, and the geometry. And so what happens is you eat the fruit, the sugar in the fruit doesn't get absorbed because the fiber set up this gel on the inside of your intestine, preventing passage into your bloodstream and then into your liver. Thereby, you're protecting your liver. Now, your liver doesn't get sick, it doesn't get fat, you don't get insulin resistance, you don't get chronic metabolic disease. In addition, because you didn't absorb it early, the food, including the sugar, moves down the intestine to the next part of the intestine called the jejunum. And what's in the jejunum? Well, the bacteria. And so now it's a free-for-all. Which happens first? Do you absorb it, or does the bacteria chew it up for its own purposes? So it turns out bacteria chew up 30% of what they get. So even though you ate it, you didn't get it. Your bacteria did. And so they stay healthy. You didn't get those extra calories, which means you're not going to gain weight. And also, because the food moves through the intestine faster because of the fiber, you get the satiety signal sooner, which means you're less likely to eat more, especially second portions. So it's helping your weight, it's helping your liver, and it's feeding your gut. And ultimately, the way food works is it's got to protect your liver and feed your gut.
Okay.
And fruit will do that. Fruit juice, because the fiber's been removed, won't.
Nice. Everybody always seems to worry about and talk a lot about the body, and mostly people are concerned about the weight gain. Not to mention all the other things, but I don't think they're that far along. They think they want to quit sugar to lose weight. That seems to be the main thing. But one of the things, especially in Hacking the American Mind, but even in Fat Chance, you talk a lot about the brain chemicals, and this is new to most people and kind of complicated, but you say it pretty simply with the dopamine and serotonin effects. Can you tell folks, and please, I mean, I'm kind of curious, I've heard different parts of your different talks about addiction and the possibility that dopamine is powerful only because it's a pathway for all kinds of drugs and alcohol affect the same dopamine receptors. So tell the folks about dopamine and serotonin and why they're eating this stuff. Why if I told them to stop eating broccoli for a week, a month, a year, they do it, or steak for a month, they do it. But when they try and quit sugar, all of a sudden there's some draw in their brain. You talk about, I think the biology is trumping the whatever your willpower. So tell them about that, because I think that would fascinate. I know what would fascinate them.
Right. Well, so first of all, who doesn't like sugar?
Right.
Nobody. Okay. That in and of itself is truly amazing. Okay. There's a taste receptor for sugar called the T1CR, and everyone's got it. And that in and of itself is truly amazing. Everyone loves sugar. And the question, of course, is like, why? Well, turns out sugar activates the reward center of the brain. And we've known this for a long time because we use a super concentrated sucrose or sugar solution in the newborn intensive care unit called Sweeties.
Oh, this is
you
crazy.
You dip the pacifier into the stuff, you put it in the newborn boy's mouth before you do the circumcision. The reason is because it releases opioids in the brain. It's a natural painkiller and reward inducer. So the Jews have wine, everyone else has sweeties. But it basically, they all do the same thing. They activate this area of the brain called the reward center. In the Latin, it's called the nucleus accumbens. And sugar activates it. Now, that gives you the sense of pleasure. And pleasure's good, and I'm not suggesting pleasure's bad. But pleasure's supposed to be like rare, not like all the time.
Right.
So once upon a time, you found sugar in 5-pound bags in the supermarket, and you had to bake it into something or add it to your coffee. Remember 1 lump or 2? That was a long time ago. No one's doing it anymore. The reason is because there's sugar in friggin' everything. It's been added to all of our food on purpose because the food industry found out when they add it, you buy more because of this effect on the reward center. Now, it turns out every single item that activates that reward center in the extreme is addictive. Now, that can be a chemical, such as cocaine, heroin, nicotine, alcohol, sugar, or it can be a behavior, such as shopping, gambling, social media, internet gaming, pornography. Okay, those are not chemicals. Those are behaviors. Doesn't matter. They light up the dopamine system, and there's an aholic after every single one of those. Shopaholic, sexaholic, chocoholic, alcoholic. You get the idea.
Yeah.
Okay? Because in the extreme, they're all addictive. Because dopamine drives addiction. Now, in the old days when dopamine was safe and rare, it wasn't a big deal. You could have a little pleasure and it would be okay. And you could have dessert like once a week and it would be okay. But now it's not once a week. Now it's once a meal because the sugar's been added to all the food. Now, 33% of the added sugar in our diet is in soft drinks. We know that. 16% is in candy, cakes, ice cream, things we would identify normally as dessert. That means 1/2 of all the added sugar in our diet is in foods we didn't know had it, like salad dressing, hamburger buns, hamburger meat, barbecue sauce, yogurt, etc., etc. Okay? And that's on purpose. They put it there on purpose. Tomato sauce, it's in everything. And the reason is because the food industry figured out when they add it, you buy more. And that's because pleasure in the extreme leads to addiction. Dopamine in the extreme drives addiction. And sugar drives dopamine. Now, just so happens we have another, which is also important. And some of you may have heard of SSRIs, which are the medicine that we give people who are depressed.
Sure.
It's an antidepressant. The SSRI stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. The idea is to boost your serotonin in order to get rid of depression. So serotonin, when in deficit, leads to unhappiness and depression. So turns out everything that ups your dopamine also downs your serotonin. So what's happened over the past 40 years is we have abdicated our pursuit of happiness for the pursuit of pleasure, because pleasure got cheap. And nothing is cheaper than processed food.
Okay. Yeah. And so, I mean, I work with, I don't know if you know, I have sugaraddiction.com, and I've been working with addicts for 30 years, and I see people who literally cannot quit it. The recovery process they have to go through. Is it your experience that it's that powerful, and that people are just deluded to the idea that it's just kind of a candy bar or it's just a muffin or whatever?
Exactly. So they can know that sugar's a problem, but because they don't know where it is,
Right.
they can't get rid of it. What if there was cocaine in everything? I mean, once upon a time, there was cocaine in Coca-Cola. Okay. But what if there was cocaine in the food? Would people be mad about the cocaine being in the food?
Mm.
Yes or no?
Yep.
No, not all of them. Some of them are very happy.
Of course. The regulators would be mad, put it that way.
Right. The regulators would be mad, but I mean, the bottom line is, the food industry found a legal addiction,
Right.
and if you don't know, then how are you supposed to get rid of it?
Yeah. So, so you once said, I heard you say, the only reason you're still standing is the science, right?
Yeah, that's the truth.
And you also got a law. You also got a law degree so that you could study the policy stuff, like in your 60s, right? Or late
my 50s, yeah.
And so you can study the policy on how they're going to change this, turn this battleship. So how are we going to turn this battleship, sir?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm trying to turn it right now,
Right.
among other things. The bottom line is the only way to deal with this issue is we have to come to peaceful coexistence with it.
Mm.
Now, we have had many, many public health crises. We had tobacco, we have had alcohol, we've had street drugs, et cetera. And what we've done for each of these is we've had to come to some sort of conciliation or some accommodation, some sort of making peace with it.
Mm.
If you try to ban it, you saw what happened with prohibition.
Right.
Didn't work out so well. Okay. So what you do is you have to reduce consumption. And how do you do that? Well, the iron law of public health says, and I totally believe in this, reducing availability reduces consumption, which reduces health harms.
Mm. Okay.
So we have to reduce availability. We don't have to ban it, but we have to, quote, regulate it. That's what we mean by reducing availability. Now, the question is, how do you do that? Well, there are many ways. It has to start with public education, because the public is not going to let you regulate something unless they know why you're regulating it. So you got to start with that. And, we're still in that mode. It's been about 7 years that we've been, up and running, trying to make a difference in terms of people's lives by getting this information out there. Yet, there is still a whole slew of people who don't know this.
Mm.
So we got a long way to go. But the medical profession's starting to get it. A recent survey suggested that 65% of clinicians now believe that sugar causes diabetes.
Mm.
Dietary sugar causes diabetes. Now, that's huge. That is a big increase from previous. On the other hand, the academic profession doesn't believe this at all. The American Diabetes Association doesn't believe this at all.
Mm.
Yet, the International Diabetes Federation, which is the international diabetes group, which is made up of 198 member organizations around the world, they do. And they actually went to the G20 and told them we needed to tax sugar to save lives, because taxation reduces effective availability.
Yeah.
So why is it that the American Diabetes Association says sugar is not a problem and the International Diabetes Association says sugar is a huge problem? Why is that? Any idea?
The money following the money.
You think? Maybe it's the money. So we have a long way to go, because, while we have the science, not everybody's listening.
Right.
And the question is, who is it that's, standing in the way? And the answer is the dark forces. Now, the dark forces were there for tobacco, and we saw what happened there. And it wasn't until we caught the dark forces in their own lie that we actually got anywhere.
Right.
And, we had the dark forces with alcohol for a while, but, that also, we dealt with that.
Right.
So there are two kinds of public health problems. Okay. There's a public health problem, and then there's a wicked public health problem.
Right. We got to wait.
So a public health problem is a problem like HIV. There's nobody making money off HIV.
Mm.
Everyone wants HIV to go away. Despite that, it took a long time for us to be able to do anything about it. But, things are way better today than they were 30 years ago.
Right.
And that was with no one standing in the way. Right?
Yeah.
But what about when people are standing in the way? That's a wicked public health problem.
Right.
And with sugar, we have the food industry. And they gross $1.46 trillion a year in the United States alone.
Wow.
Okay? And of that, was it 45% is gross profit?
Wow. It's a good business.
So yeah, that's a pretty darn good business. They're making $657 billion on added sugar. So you think they're going to give this up willingly?
No.
Well, that's where we are. So
you're talking about policy, you're talking about government, you're talking about laws. Tell us about grassroots. There are going to be, along with a lot of new people, there's going to be a lot of, you'll be preaching to some of the choir here. So tell us what can people do in their own lives? Obviously, we're voting with our pocket, with our wallets. But other than that, what else can folks do to help move this along?
Well, so there are a couple of things. Number one, call your congressman. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, Congress don't want to do anything about this. Until there are more votes than dollars, Congress is going to be dead in the water. Plus, of course, this administration, is totally on board with the food companies, because we have a fast food addict in the White House.
Right.
Who's actually killed the new nutrition facts label. So we wait till the next administration to even be able to fix that. My unwritten job in the next couple of years is to ally the medical profession, the dental profession, and the dietary profession to speak with one voice. But when we do get a new administration, we can be organized and ready to go.
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to do. The dentists, they're easy. They're all over it. Remember, the dentists were the original anti-sugar advocates.
Right.
Going back to the 19-teens, Weston Price.
Yeah.
The dietitians are another story.
Mm.
Because of dietitians, it's all about calories. And this is not a calorie issue. As I mentioned before, we have the toxic metabolite. It has nothing to do with calories. It has to do with sugar. It has to do with this molecule fructose. It has to do with the way it's metabolized. So dietitians, they count calories. They do math. This is not math. This is science. It's been very hard to get the dietitians off calories.
Can you do a calorie is not a calorie for the folks? Because that's confusing for a lot of people. I'm trying to kill this this phrase, empty calories, like a free pass. Like, can you just a short, because I know that's complicated. Gary Taubes wrote an entire 600-page book about it, but can you try and summarize it for the folks?
Sure. All right. So everyone says a calorie is a calorie. Now, I will tell you, a calorie burned is a calorie burned. It is. But a calorie eaten is not a calorie eaten.
Mm.
I've already given you one example of that right away, the fiber story, the fruit juice versus fruit. Because if the bacteria chew it up, even though you ate it, you didn't get it. So you count it as a calorie consumed, but it didn't do anything to you because the bacteria chewed it up.
Mm.
So a calorie is not a calorie because if it came with fiber, the calorie wasn't for you.
Okay.
How about protein? Now, protein builds muscle. But what if you consume protein and you're not building muscle? What if you're burning it for energy? And, unless you're pumping iron, you're basically burning your protein for energy
Right.
because you're not building muscle. So what happens to the protein? The protein gets chopped up into its component amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. Then those amino acids go to the liver, and the liver has to take the amino group off, turn it into an organic acid in order to be able to burn it to completion. Now, in order to get that amino group off, it has to invest energy, as opposed to in carbohydrate, where it can basically turn that carbohydrate into energy straight away. In other words, there's a net deficit of burning protein for energy versus burning carbohydrate for energy. You get the same number of molecules of ATP, chemical energy, out, but you had to invest energy in to make protein work. So there's a difference in how many calories you get out because there was a difference in what went in. So a protein calorie is not like a carbohydrate calorie because a calorie is not a calorie. How about fat? So over here on one side, we have omega-3s, heart healthy, anti-inflammatory, anti-Alzheimer's, single best thing you can put in your body. Over here, we have trans fats, the devil incarnate, consumable poison. Okay,
Right.
Will kill you. No question, will kill you. And the FDA even agrees, finally, after 25 years, agreed that they have to disappear from our diet. Okay, but we were consuming those like crazy for a whole long time. It was called margarine. That was trans fats. All right, so they're both 9 calories per gram, but one will save your life and one will kill you. Because a calorie is not a calorie. Because it's not about the calories. It's about the chemistry. And finally, fructose and glucose. They're both 4 calories per gram, but glucose is the energy of life. Every cell on the planet burns glucose for energy. Glucose is so important that if you don't consume it, your body makes it. The Inuit, the Eskimos, they didn't have any carbohydrate, didn't have any place to grow carbohydrate. They had ice, they had whale blubber, okay? But they still had a serum glucose level because glucose is the energy of life. And if you don't consume it, you have to make it. Fructose, though, it's the same 4 calories per gram, but fructose is completely vestigial to all eukaryotic life, to all vertebrate life. There is no biochemical reaction in any animal cell on the planet that requires dietary fructose. Not necessary, completely vestigial. And when you consume excess, your liver turns that into liver fat and drives chronic metabolic disease. They're both 4 calories per gram, and glucose is necessary and fructose isn't, because a calorie is not a calorie. Period.
That was good. That'll help folks. So what I allow myself one personal question. I have a question. This actually is more of a science question, but for me, I want to know the answer to this. What your opinion is on this, in that you say in Hacking American Mind that chronic excessive reward leads to both depression and addiction. Meaning, and basically, you were in the chapter like describing the pummeling of your dopamine receptors over time. Do you believe it's possible that fructose was so minimal in society, in nature so long ago that it could be a psychoactive drug of sorts?
Absolutely. In fact, there's lots of data to support that it was a psychoactive drug, and that some of the psychoactivity has gone down because we're exposed to it all the time.
So you're...
In fact, Eric Clapton, I show a 20-second video that he did back in 1978 on 60 Minutes with Ed Bradley, talking about how he got into sugar addiction before he got into heroin addiction. And the reason was because sugar was his psychoactive substance at age 6.
Right. I mean, I believe it. I see it every day, day in and day out. People are addicted. I mean, I have recovering people, hard drugs, heroin, intravenous drug users. To a man, to a woman, they've found sugar harder to get off of than their drugs. And they've already been sober 2 or 10 years,
I totally believe that. And the reason is because if you're an alcoholic, you know what you have to avoid.
Right.
But if you're a sugar addict, you don't know what you have to avoid.
Mm. Right. Exactly. Exactly. You got to take that tiger out 3 times a day and walk it.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Well, I know you've had a long day, so I'm going to wrap this up. But tell the folks where they can get you online. You have an incentive or a new group at the university, a nonprofit, your books. Just tell us everywhere where we can reach you.
Oh yeah, I'm busy. So I am now clinically retired. I stopped seeing patients.
Not really, though.
And part of the reason is because I realized I could take care of 1,000,000 kids easier than I could take care of one.
Mm.
You know, I mean, like I said, for every kid I treated, 10 more were showing up at the door, and it was getting a little tough.
Yeah.
So it's a little easier now, and I appreciate that. But I'm still doing research. I'm still doing policy. We're still coming out with papers like the one 2 weeks ago that I mentioned. We got more coming. Sitting down with my research team in 2 days to go over new data. Very excited about.
Good.
In addition, I wrote these 2 books, Fat Chance, also a cookbook, Fat Chance Cookbook, and The Hacking of the American Mind. And I will tell you, confidentially, I'm about to write a 3rd book on the problems of the healthcare system.
Okay. Yeah.
Right now, it is titled "There's No Pill for This."
I like it. That's robertlustig.com, gang, just so you know.
Right. And then there's robertlustig.com, which is my website. There is my nonprofit, which is called Eat Real, and we promote restaurants, cafeterias, medical centers, school districts that procure, market, and sell real food in an attempt to try to educate the public from the bottom up. So, like if you see a green fork in a restaurant window, you know that if you eat there, it won't kill you.
Good.
And that's valuable because then the competitors go, hey, I want that too. And, basically starts a movement. So it's like LEED certification for buildings or fair trade. People look for that now when they buy coffee and for bananas, because they know that if they buy those, then, they're helping other people.
Right.
So same concept. So Eat Real, and Real is an acronym. It's Responsible Epicurean and Agricultural Leadership. And so I'm the chief science officer for that. And, we're trying to make a difference. I'm now also in technology addiction. And I'm helping a new nonprofit called the Center for Humane Technology. And you can find that online at humanetech.com, because we're trying to solve, gaming and social media addiction and depression. And, it's not that much different from sugar.
The opposite of dopamine labs here in Los Angeles, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm a busy guy.
So tell me a last question, and actually it's kind of a double question. How do you see this all playing out, and what influence in the world do you want to have on it all? Obviously, you've told a lot about it, but give me a little, just your best off the top of your head prediction of the next 5 or 10 years, and how you want to play a role in all that.
Well, I mentioned before, all these cultural tectonic shifts take 30 years.
Mm.
Question is why?
Mm.
I'll tell you why. Because you have to educate the children, and when the children grow up, they vote. And then the naysayers are dead. Nothing
worth doing is worth done in one lifetime, right?
That's right. So I know that all of these issues are going to outlive me. I don't expect to see the end of them, because I'm looking at that 30-year timeline. Everything else that's changed takes 30 years. This is going to do it too. We're about 7 years in. So we're still in public education mode, but we're starting to see benefits of that fruit. Like, for instance, soda taxes in San Francisco and Oakland and Alameda, and Antioch and Albany, and also the UK sugar tax and the South Africa sugar tax. In fact, there are 28 sugar taxes around the world. And, if we hadn't done this work that explaining the science, they wouldn't be there. So these are opportunities to educate the public as to the problem. So it's not just the tax, which is good because it reduces effective availability, but people then say, well, like, why are you taxing this? So the question is like, what do you do about that? My goal is to get the food industry to recognize that they can make money doing the right thing instead of the wrong.
Okay.
Right? And there's no reason they can't do that. They can, and they've done it in the past. And it's called differential subsidization. What if you taxed soda and used the money from the tax to subsidize water?
Wow.
The beverage industry makes both. They won't be out anything.
Mm.
And then they can make money selling the right thing.
Right.
So that's called differential subsidization. But, they're afraid. They're afraid, and the public doesn't understand it yet. And so you need public education in order to prep people so that you can make these changes ultimately. So, I figure the next probably 5 to 10 years, we're still going to be in public education mode. And then, once people are there, then, there'll be more votes than dollars. And then we'll start seeing some legislation, making its way through to start doing something about it.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. And I really, your mission, just so you know, gang, this kind of all got started with a video that looked like a college lecture. It was 90 minutes long that by nobody's help or no BuzzFeed or anybody else went viral. Yep. And catapulted the good doctor into this front line of the sugar world. So
yeah, I got to tell you, I am not a big fan of social media.
Right.
But on the other hand, I owe I don't want to say notoriety, but I want to say I owe my ability to get the message out to social media.
Yeah.
Ultimately, these things are tools, and tools can be used for good when they inform, or bad when they entertain unfiltered.
Gotcha.
And, so I think curation of social media is going to be required, and we're not there yet.
Great. Well, keep up the good work, and I really appreciate your time. Everybody out there, take a look at Dr. Lustig's books and his websites, and you'll learn a lot. And anyway, thanks. Hold on one second there. And we will talk to you guys real soon. And make sure you check out the Low Carb USA site and go on down to the San Diego event. Talk to you real soon. Bye for now.
Bye-bye now.